You are now listening to the A Dose of Disruption podcast, powered by Experian. Weekly compelling conversations on making money moves and growing your network. The place where you can learn to be you and do you all at the same time. I'm your host, Shelly Bell, and now, let's see what this week's Level Up looks like. What's up, y'all? We are back. Yo, thank y'all for tuning in every week. Y'all are the real MVPs, okay? And I love being here, being able to give you, damn, I can't even talk, to give you some great content. So here we go. Today for the, you know what time it is. It's time for the Shelly Brief. Okay, so I have been following or attempting to follow the news on HR 40, which is a bill being passed by the 116th Congress, or not being passed, it's being put out there to be passed, that talks about reparations. I want to read you what the summary of the bill says. So HR 40 is a commission to study and develop reparation proposals for the African Americans Act. This bill establishes a commission to study and develop reparation proposals for African Americans. The commission shall examine slavery and discrimination in the colonies and the United States from 1619 to present and recommend appropriate remedies. Among other requirements, the commission shall identify the role of the federal and state governments in supporting the institution of slavery. 2, forms of discrimination, and they're going to evaluate forms of discrimination in public and private sectors against freed slaves and their descendants. And 3, lingering negative effects of slavery on living African Americans and society. Now, I'm so intrigued by this, and I'm actually so excited to see this being put through. Now, I know a lot of people out there are like, girl, we ain't gonna get no reparations, girl. Don't even worry about that. They're not about to give us nothing. What I would say is that a lot of people said the same thing about having a black president. A lot of people have said the same thing about having a woman VP or, a woman in certain positions. Listen, anything is possible. The pandemic has taught us that what we think is required is not. The way we educate, the way we do whatever is not required. So I am excited about this bill and what's going to come from it. I also think this is a way that we look at the government and the way that things move. Things move slowly. So you have to look at this as a matter of the first step is opening up the study of what happened. The second step is deciding that what happened is something that we should go further into. So opening up to proposals from African Americans to talk about, right? Like for us, we just look, give us the 40 acres and a mule, let it be a thing. But they no. We know how this works. Shout out to all the black people in Congress. We know how this works. We're gonna walk them into it. We're gonna figure this out. So first, we just gonna put forward the study and the opening of proposals being submitted. If they can, because you know what, it would be huge considering looking at the proposal summary for them to even start to look at the repercussions of slavery during the time that they are going to study it. So stay tuned. Let's see what happens. Up next, I guess for today is Mike Delgado. Super hyped to talk to him. Really great guy. And he is a social media director for Experian. And I'm calling him the original influencer, the OI, because he was one of the first influencers and had the opportunity to work on Obama's State of the Union address. So he got some really insightful things to say. Here we go. What's up, y'all? We are here with Mike. I like that. And we're about to jump into some topics. I'm super excited to have you here. The social media director at Experian, okay? Mike Delgado, that is social media director. I still feel like people are not quite grasping the realm of what this means in marketing. So interestingly enough, even at colleges now, I still don't even see social media classes yet in the marketing departments, or, it's interesting that nobody's really grasped. I don't see Facebook ad classes or, Google ad classes in the marketing departments at school. So what got you here? You could be doing anything in the world. You could be doing anything in the world of marketing that you want to do. Why the social media director at Experian?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And it's funny because when I was first offered a social media role about 14 years ago at a previous company, and I just felt like social media is way too niche. Like I really like working in marketing. I like all aspect, copywriting, email marketing, SEO, search marketing. So I played in all those different areas. And when I originally was offered a social media role, I said no. I said I felt it was just too new at that time, like 14 years ago. It's just, I didn't really see any sort of career trajectory for it. Didn't really know, like, where do you go with social media? Like, you just kind of manage accounts, but what then? Like, what does that look like 15 years or 20 years down the line? So when I ended up coming up to Experian, I've always had a passion for community building. And I was very interested in learning about other marketers at Experian. You know, we're in 45 countries. And so I was really curious, like, well, who are other marketers doing the same thing that I'm doing, but just in other regions? And how can I learn from them? And how can we share best practices? So I started to do I built like an internal social community at Experian about 10 years ago, which ended up building a use case internally for like why community works internally at Experian and how it can benefit employees from sharing information. And so this is like kind of the early days of like corporate internal community building. So that got the eye of a couple of different people. And then I was asked, like, hey, Mike, do you want to do social media externally for Experian? Right now we have agencies doing it. We would like to have somebody internally managing all of our external social. And when I found out who my boss would be, who's Jerry Chop, I just like, yes, I like at that point, I feel like for your career, like when you work with the right people, it makes all the difference in the world.
Yeah.
So even though like my heart wasn't into like, oh yeah, social media is really what I want to do with my life, I was like, I could learn a lot from Jerry. And I feel like being under his leadership, I could just grow and be nurtured. And so that was like 9 years ago, which is crazy to think that I jumped into social media 9 years ago and kind of watched evolution of these different social media channels. But it's been an absolute blast, like working in PR, social media, and I have a wonderful team, and it's been an absolute blessing, like one of the best moves I've ever made. Yeah, I think moving over to work for Jerry.
Yeah. So what did you go to school for?
Yeah. So oddly enough, I started, I always wanted to be a film director. So in high school, I was all about like writing scripts and working on TV productions and commercials. And I worked as a producer at one point. And then and then my friend who was a mentor was like, hey, Mike, like stop taking TV writing courses. Like you're doing that now. Like you need to learn to tell stories. And so he told me that I should pursue storytelling and become an English lit major. And I was like, really? Like I thought I should be taking classes like, TV production and film production. And he's like, no, you need to learn how to write good stories. If you want to be a good film director, be a storyteller. So yeah, English lit became my major.
Nice. It's so funny you said it because I was going to say what I'm hearing you kind of come out in your story is storytelling and also sales to an extent, right? And I think the history of sales or the salesperson in America, I'm so intrigued by it because at one point, this was like one of the things you wanted to be. This was the job description in the newspaper and on the billboards. It's like become a salesperson, right? And then that evolved over time where it was like, oh no, anybody can be a salesperson because you're on social media. Right. And so I said to myself, I should do some research on that, but like the storytelling parts of it, I used to sell vacuum cleaners and I also write poetry, by the way. And have done some journalism. But one of the things I used to say, well, I say now, I didn't say it then because when I was selling vacuum cleaners then, it was grit and grind and hard. But it was in college. But now when I look back, I'm like, this was actually one of the most important experiences that I had because I had to show up at your door and get you to let me in your house to sell you something that you most likely already own. Right. So the level of storytelling that I have to do to get in your house and then the level of storytelling I have to do to get you to actually watch me just vacuum, right? Because essentially that's what I'm about to do. I'm about to vacuum with this new vacuum that I showed up to your door with. and to get you to be like, okay, well, let me see you vacuum, as if you've never seen anybody vacuum before, right? And as if you hadn't been vacuuming for your last 10 years of life, right? So I think like this kind of being able to speak to people, like that is the power of social media, and you get to be in this amazing seat of kind of like directing that. Did you do any case studies? Like, did you write up anything about like the internal, or do you have anything to be read about your internal community building? Because I also want to get into that part, like community building and how important you see that is inside, and how do you see that from a social media standpoint?
Yeah, and I think what you also raise with doing selling and going door to door, like not only are you learning to tell better stories and learning how to better communicate to different types of people, like it's great training and it's scary training, right? Doing door to door, but also building trust, right? Like that is another huge part to this, because not only are you having to gain the confidence, right, to talk to somebody who you don't know, and then like share a story, try to build trust with that person that they want to buy from you. Like the same is true with internal community building. Like you're meeting new people who don't know you. They don't know what your intentions are. You're needing to tell them why it's valuable for them to join your community or your tribe or whatever it is that you're building. And then how are you supporting giving back to those people? Like why you have to make it valuable for them to spend time with you, right? So like building community is something that I've been doing for a very, very long time. And, learning how the needs of different people, how you can help support them. And I think at the heart of it, Shelly, like we have to like love it. Like we have to love being with people, right? If you don't love it, if you can't have empathy for others, you're not going to be good at community building. You're not going to be good at building trust. You have to truly want to be wanting to help other people, and then striving to figure out what can I do to build a relationship with them, and be very intentional. So in the very beginning, Shelly, when I was first starting internal community building, I was a marketer doing digital marketing, working in email, working on search marketing for the company. And I was like, there are other marketers that have been doing this for a long time, much longer than I have. And I can learn a lot from them, but they don't know me. I don't know them. And so I just began emailing, just straight up direct, just emailing them, introduce myself a little bit. Would love to learn a little bit more about your work, how you're doing targeting on social media or on Google AdWords. And it started like that, just really one-on-one. And then I said, hey, I would like to build like an internal community so we can all kind of share best practices, our PowerPoint decks, things that we're learning. Would that be something you're interested in? And for the most part, like 90% of people said, yeah, go ahead and invite me. I don't know how much time I can commit to it, but invite me in. And then from then on out, it was really me being very intentional about reaching out to people, tagging them, right? Hey, want to get your thoughts on this real quick. And also making it very easy for them to chime in, like not asking too much, like just a very simple question to help to just draw people in, and hopefully at some point build community. Because it takes a really long time to bring people in and provide value so that they want to give and they want to also get benefits from that community. And that ended up leading later on down the line when I started working for Experian 9 years ago in social media for the credit chat community on Twitter. And I love Twitter. There's like so many fantastic conversations happening there. And so like 9 years ago, I started up a community called Credit Chat. So basically every Wednesday at 3 p.m. Eastern, we are having a credit chat. So today, actually, we're going to have a credit chat where we talk about all types of personal finance topics. And these are issues that matter to all of us, whether it's paying down credit card debt, paying down student loan debt, talking about things like retail therapy, like when we get depressed, how we spend our money is a little bit different, right? So like addressing real issues, how we're managing our money, and then talking it out with the community, and really hearing from the community, how do they manage those difficult things? And then also things like we just had, we're on Valentine's Day coming up. So it's like when you have a partner, when do you bring up finances? Because that can be a sticking point. That could be a very painful conversation. and there's a lot of shame that can be there. So it's
That's
like,
right.
how do we begin to address these topics and just like be open? Say, hey, yeah, this is a hard thing to talk about. At what point do you bring it up with your partner? At what point do you bring up debt? At what point do you bring up these different things? And how do you have an open and honest conversation that's like a positive movement? So, and I think a lot of times just by speaking it, we can like get rid of the shame. Like we're all talking about it.
You know, you brought up so much there. I want to kind of go back to something you said about relationship building, because it's so key. And it's something I try to tell our community a lot. It's like, you know, build relationships and then you build a business. I remember someone told me that. And something that you said is like showing people like where it is valuable to spend time with you. And the time is such an interesting concept across various communities. This also has to do with like what you're talking about, like when do you bring up something? It's because I think there's a little bit of fear around time. Because if earlier in our relationship moments, you know, if let's say you're dating, you know, do I tell you right now that I have good credit or bad credit? Do you assume that right now? Is that a factor in whether or not you continue to spend time with me? Right? Like if I don't have a certain kind of job, or you have a certain kind of job and I don't, you make a certain kind of money and I don't, like, will you continue to spend time with me? Like, where is it valuable? Where do these, our finances fall, and how valuable it is or is not to continue to spend time in this direction? Stocks, saving, credit. These are places where we're asking ourselves, does it make sense for me to continue to spend time building my credit? I never, you know, my family didn't know anything about credit. You know, I don't really need, I'm not trying to get a loan. You know what I mean? Like I'm actually looking for anything to buy right now. So like, does it make sense for me to spend time doing that? Does it make sense for me to spend time being, you know, so the retail therapy, that makes sense to people in their mind to spend time in retail therapy because there is this reward that they feel almost immediately. Whereas like, it made sense to me to spend that time doing that with that money. You know, even though I spent like my whole 40-hour work week making that one couple hundred, you know, couple $1,000, you know, the time I spent there balanced against the time it takes me to buy something feels like it was worth it, even though like it feels, you know, in that, yeah, the time piece of finances, I don't think we talk about enough, right? I think there's also things around like the Black community where if you feel like you can go outside right now and get killed by the police, then everybody has to know that your concept of time is off. You're not thinking about 10 years. You know, you're not thinking about 5 years. You lucky if you're thinking about 3. You know, so this concept of legacy, time, generational wealth. Sometimes I think that subliminally in all the trauma gets buried in just like, oh, hey, like you got time. You're going to be here. It's okay. You got time. You wake up way more days than you don't. Okay, so guess what? It's not what if I die tomorrow. It's what if I live tomorrow, and then how am I going to spend that time and my the finances I built during that time the best way possible for what it makes sense for the rest of my life or the lives that I've built that are coming after me.
Yeah. And you know, it's early growing up, like I didn't have like good modeling of how to use time. And when it came to my finances, I remember like when I got my first credit card, I was 16 years old. They're handing out credit cards back then. Had my credit card and got my first credit card bill. And I was like, I got time to pay that. I got 30 days, right? Talk about time. And then I missed the payment because I'm like, oh, I could pay it off later. It's just a little bit of interest. It was like I bought a $20 item. So it's like, what? I'm going to pay $22 next month. Like, no big deal. And then I miss another payment. And now in my mind, I'm thinking, well, it's just another $2, right? So then I end up paying off the bill. And then I do that same cycle again because I'm thinking like, well, it's not that much money to miss a payment. And it's a little financial penalty. Little did I know I was damaging my credit every month because I'm missing my payments, right? But I'm not thinking that way. And I don't know about credit. I don't understand credit education. I don't understand like how that affects interest rates later on, right? And so there's all this stuff that I didn't get educated on. And So I ended up like damaging my credit very early on. So when I ended up coming to Experian, working for social media, I was like, if I can do anything to help the community not make the same mistakes I did, because when it comes to time and like missing payments, and I was thinking, oh, the only penalty is like I got to pay a little extra, but you know what? I can't pay that bill right now, so I gotta buy this other thing right now, right? So like I really tried to take this concept of time and all my mistakes and put it right into credit chat, and let's talk about this stuff.
Yeah, I love that. That's so awesome. You know, I think another thing that you really brought up is just getting curious. Like at some point, where do we lose that? And I think again, this also kind of is baked into the concept of time, because if you have time to explore, or if you can find it, or if you are an explorer, which I think comes through in like you doing the film, like you want to be a filmmaker, even in English, right? Like there's this idea of exploration and exploring and being willing to learn. I remember when I used to do poetry, like I said, and I had this poetry CD that I put out, and I'm like,
that's awesome.
Yeah, I'm going, and I have a couple on Apple Music actually, but I never talk about it. So I'm saying to this veteran poet, like, go download my CD. And he's like, why should I download your CD? Because it's great. He's like, okay, because it's great. Okay, there's a lot of great CDs. So we ended up in this dialogue, and he said to me, like, you know what you know, and I know what I know. Now, wouldn't you be better off if you know what I know and what you know? And I was like, you're right. I want to know what you know. And so that has actually been my kind of like way of going about all things at that point. Like, I want to know what the people know. I don't just want to know what they're doing. Like, I want to know how they think about what they're doing. And if I know how you think about what you're doing, then maybe I can find where that makes sense for me to think about how I'm doing what I'm doing, So I think like there's just so much there. One of the things that you worked on was the promoting Barack Obama's presidential address with the White House. Like, how was that? How did that feel? So historical. Also, just like a lot of conversation to come back at that promotion. So, like, how does that feel when you're managing social media at that level, working with such a huge, very anchoring entity? So there's Experian, that's huge. Right. And here you are working with the president of the United States. On top of that, the first Black president in the White House. Like, what was that feeling like?
Yeah. And that was like, what a fantastic opportunity. Like, what a blessing to be able to get invited to go help promote the State of Union address. And I think Barack Obama was like the first president to really embrace social media. Like the way that he got the youth involved with using social to start talking about very important social issues, racial issues. And, President Obama was like on all the platforms. And how that even happened was I was very big early on. I don't know if you remember Google Plus, but that was like a social network that was starting to it was kind of like the next big thing. Everyone felt like if Google's going into social networking, that's going to be the network that's going to be the next big Google, Facebook at the time. And so I was all in on Google Plus, and I started a blog, and I was really kind of growing my presence on Google Plus at the time and trying to help and build community there. And so anyways, that ended up leading to a reason why I was invited to come and like use Google Plus and use my other platforms to promote the things that Barack Obama was doing and saying. And it was just a complete honor, like to be able to be there. I got a tour of the White House and got a chance to, it was like amazing, like to be able to have that experience. And it was a complete honor. And also to be thinking about how, like, because you mentioned, yes, I was working as a director of social media at Experian from a corporate perspective, and then going personally as myself to talk about societal issues and raise awareness for certain things that President Obama wanted to make sure that people were aware of. And so that was like my first time really kind of using social for activism and using social media to like talk about political issues, because I never really did that before. Most of my social media stuff was like stories and talking about social media and a lot of fun and entertaining stuff and memes and things like that. But I never really used social media for politics before. or religion or anything like that. So that was the first time I really was like, oh, I'm actually stepping out of my comfort zone and moving into a new area. And President Obama has modeled what this looks like on social media. And I was already retweeting him, but like this is the first time I'm now using my channels to really go above and beyond to start to address some of these issues. And that was the very first time that I was like getting involved. And it was like, it was a huge feeling, like a very positive feeling of like, oh my gosh, I'm getting involved in this movement.
You was an OG or OI, original influencer. You know, so you're at the beginning. You know, we look at influencers now, but like you were at the beginning of what it meant to be an influencer. I think we had high hopes for Google Plus, and then but that's another conversation. So we have to bring you back to talk about that. But I think it's awesome to hear. You know, it's interesting. Like these handles are pretty coveted, right? Like the Experian handle, you're talking about reaching millions of people all over the world, you know, and, you know, even some of the other partners that we work with, Visa, Nike, like these handles are coveted handles, you know? Does that feel like a really big responsibility? You know, cause I think like, you know, are you always having to like extremely vet what you're going to put out on this handle? How has that been for you?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And it's like a really hard question that anybody who's managing social for a brand has to be thinking about, especially in light of what we've seen in the US with the amount of racism, the amount of homophobia, the white supremacy, the recent incitement and violence at our US Capitol. Like all these different issues have been, you know, they've always been there, but they're just more visible now. And I'm noticing a trend, a positive trend, where organizations are beginning to make statements, right, about these different issues. And I think the younger generation especially are looking to companies to say like Nike or whatever company, like, what do you say about that issue? Because when I buy my next pair of shoes or my hoodie, I want to know who you're representing. What side of history are you on? And so I'm watching this, and I'm watching brands that never spoke out before on issues. When George Floyd was murdered, I saw, I think it was like 500 million social posts went out with the hashtag Black Lives Matter within like 10 days. It was like phenomenal amount of conversation, much needed conversation. And I saw brands that never spoke out on social issues begin to talk about, not only, of course, they're against racism, but also like, what are you doing about it? Right? Because it wasn't enough to just like, yes, we oppose what the police did. We oppose the murder of George Floyd. It wasn't enough just to make that statement. It was like, well, what else are you doing internally at your organization to address racism? What are you doing to increase Black representation at your company? What are you doing to assist other marginalized communities? Like, we want to hear from you companies. And so as these different social issues have come up, and especially last year, right at the beginning of COVID-19, we saw a dramatic increase in visibility of xenophobia and anti-Asian racism very early on. And so not only do you want to make sure that our employees feel safe and protected, so we're having our own internal conversations with employees about these issues, which is super important, but then also like, how do we then take those conversations, those messages from leaders internally, and then put them out externally to show that we have humans that work at Experian, and we have stories to tell, and we have people that are involved in every type of community. We're in 45 countries. And so, and sometimes there has to be education that's done internally as well. Like, for example, the issue with Black Lives Matter versus All Lives Matter, right? We saw that debate happening within the US, and there had to be an education done. Like, of course, all lives matter. That's not what we're saying. We're talking about in this particular moment in time, we're talking about why Black Lives Matter. And that should not be a problem for you. And so like those kind of debates and conversations, like as we're having them in the US and around the world, we're also explaining to our colleagues in different countries who don't have the background of like the systemic racism in the US, right? So I'm talking to my colleagues in Brazil. Let me tell you about the difference between Black Lives Matter and All Lives Matter and the systemic racism that's been in the US and why it's really important that we're embracing the Black Lives Matter motto, right? So like other countries may not have the same understanding, right? So there's like education that goes along with this. But yeah, I've been noticing just a huge trend, a positive trend with more companies addressing these issues externally as well as internally to make sure that the employees feel safe, protected. And so I like the movement where things are headed.
Yeah, same. I mean, you know, after the murder of George Floyd, what we saw, what I call the white awakening, was really interesting for me as a Black person. Because it's like, hey, we've been over here. Hello, like, where's everybody been? I think this is one of the first times that it was undeniable. And we see these things happening throughout the different times in history where there's like, kind of like, not ignorance from the not being smart part, but the like just in ignorance of it. Right. And then there's this boom that's just like, oh my God, that was happening. Like I knew people was doing something or, I knew it wasn't all good, but like, I didn't know it was that bad. And we see it across, a few different issues in America, whether it be homelessness, whether it be, wage gaps, whether it be, underrepresented groups, Muslim things, like these different groups. So to have to be in charge of that moment or, from a social media standpoint, for such a big entity, like I couldn't imagine some of the conversations you had to have. So kudos to you for, having those big conversations across the world. The U.S. is easy for us sometimes to feel like we're the only people in existence, but there's a lot of other people around, right? That also, see us at a distance and are just gathering and sometimes creating our own narratives and stories. And so when we see these, very important handles that are reaching millions of people, speaking in a way that is supportive of human life is really, really important. Yeah.
Yeah. And you mentioned like curiosity earlier on, and like that's super important for anybody who's managing social, because especially from a global perspective, like we're trying to look at all the different issues that are happening around the world. So like right now in the US is Black History Month. And so we're like celebrating Black History Month. We're honoring our employees who are Black, talking about what we're doing to increase representation, what we're doing to improve diversity and inclusion at Experian in the US. But then like globally, like in Europe and in the UK, it's LGBTQ History Month. So in the UK, we have other banners promoting LGBTQ. And there's like a rise in hate towards LGBTQ people in Europe right now. So that's another issue that we're focused on. So like part of, I think we all have a job to stay educated on the issues that are impacting our marginalized communities around the world, and then knowing when to say what and where, right? And then also like trying not to confuse people, because when it's a global handle, some people don't understand, right? Like, oh, why are you celebrating LGBTQ History Month? That's not until September or whatever in our region. So trying to it is would navigate those areas carefully. Yeah. Because I remember even when
no, that's such great perspective.
When George Floyd was killed, I think that was May 25th, and then 5 days later, we're like in June, which is we celebrate LGBTQ. It's Pride Month in June. And so during that period, we were making our statements about George Floyd and what we were doing and our partnership with NAACP. So that was happening in May. And then June 1 comes, and that's when we generally go all out to celebrate Pride. And we usually change out all of our banners. And our Pride ERG group that I'm part of, the leadership says, let's hold off. Like right now, we need to mourn George Floyd. We're just going to hold off on celebrating Pride until another week. So we waited some time. And then once we did celebrate Pride on social and change all our banners, we changed the flag, the Pride flag, to include the black stripe in honor of George Floyd and our Black community. And so that was kind of a beautiful kind of memorial to George Floyd and Black Lives Matter. So it was beautiful to see how our ERGs, our employee resource groups, navigated that period and partnered up during these very difficult seasons where you're trying to make sure that everyone is being honored and celebrated, but also pausing when other community groups are hurting.
Wow. I really love that. I mean, people are the point, right? I mean, we talk a lot about the systems that be and all the controls and all the ways that things work, but like we're human at the end of the day. I mean, I think one thing that the quarantine has showed us is that we're human. You're on this very important call and then your dog barks or your kid runs into the live stream and it's like, hey, remember that this is life. Remember that we're human. Now, I can't let you go without us talking about giving some tips on like how to manage social media to our community, because I think like, this is a big deal. You know, it's a big deal to need to promote through social, to be able to handle, the social promotion, like to be able to, like, it's a big deal. Like so many companies right now, especially because of the pandemic, had to pivot to online. Now you can go direct to consumer, right? You know, you don't have to be slowed down by some of the other systems that you traditionally would have had to before social media. What would you say, if you could give me your top 3 tips for managing social media, what would those be?
Yeah, that's a good question. And I'll say that I think the first one is authenticity is key. And, you just said like right now during the pandemic, we're all home, we're all live streaming, and there's going to be the kids running in the background, the dogs barking, helicopters going overhead, someone mowing a lawn outside, like ambulances going by, right? That's all kind of part of the authenticity that's around us. And I think that we have to just learn to embrace it. I think a lot of organizations, especially as I've watched how companies have been using video, like there's definitely a place for polished, clean video, right? Where it's like studio quality, you got great sound, you're maybe on a sound stage, or you're in a place where you have a beautiful background. But then there's also times where you just are going live wherever you are, right? You got the cat over there, everything. And those are the most real, the most authentic. There's no script. You're just talking from your heart. And to me, like that authentic conversation, we need to see more of that from brands. Like, I know the polished stuff is easier to do because you can script it all out. Everything can be planned. It's cut, chopped, produced, beautiful. And there can be great stuff done like that. But there's something to be said about just going live on Instagram or just going live on Facebook and just talking about issues, bringing on your team to address certain topics. And so I think my number one tip would be like, find ways to show authenticity in your social media. And I think live streaming is a super powerful way of doing that. And I think my number 2 tip is that brands need to be looking at new channels where communities are going to. And right now, TikTok is blowing up, and it has been for the last 2 years. And I just looked at the last top global social media sites in the world, and I think TikTok's in the 10 now. It's on the top 10, and it's climbing. And the kids are spending as much time on TikTok as they are on YouTube, which is like, that says something. Like, when TikTok was going for sale, like all the big brands wanted to buy TikTok because it knows it has the eyeballs of the younger generation. And for those that don't know, like TikTok is more than a dance channel. It's a place where people are sharing content, just like Instagram Live, just like Instagram Daily Stories. There's a lot of great content, and brands need to figure out, how do I get in there? How do I tell engaging stories with TikTok? So there's a huge opportunity for brands to be on TikTok and to be able to attract this audience that's there, because they're hungry for video content. And again, authenticity, using live video. And I think also my third tip is like, how do you use these channels to engage your audience? That it's not just about you, right? It's about engaging with your community, finding ways to bring them in, right? Through the chat, through the conversation. Like, it's not about you. It's about you bringing them in. It's about you inviting them to share their challenges, their struggles, their questions. And then you might not have all the answers, and that's okay. You can just like riff off that and invite more people to share their tips and bring them in. And that's what authenticity is all about. It doesn't mean you have all the answers. It means like you're creating a safe space for people to be able to share what's going on and also their advice to others. You know, right after George Floyd was killed by police, we had a credit chat. I mentioned that we have credit chat every Wednesday at 3 p.m. Eastern. That's for the 9 years. So as different issues have come up, when George Floyd was killed by police, we had our credit chat that Wednesday. And we're still, figuring out our messaging and what we need to say and how do we say it appropriately and working with our ERGs. We have our chat, and I just said, let's just talk. Let's just let our community grieve. Let's retweet. Let's share out the important voices that need to be heard right now. This isn't about Experian. This is about our community that needs to grieve, and let's hold that safe space, and let's be there for our Black community. And so that's what we use that time for. And every single time there's been an issue, we're trying to just leave space to let our community grieve. And that's also, I think the last tip I would say is that if you are a brand and you want to be authentic on social, that means that when there are social justice issues, racial justice issues, trauma that's happening in your country, in your city, to your communities that you're trying to reach, you have to know that you now have a place, you have a platform to be educating, and you also need to do your due diligence to get educated on the issues too. So that's another really important thing, because social media can be really fun, right? It's really fun to retweet and do memes, but when your community's in trauma, right? When your community is being hurt, when marginalized communities are being hated on, like you have a responsibility to be able to use your platforms to address these issues. And you may not be comfortable doing it, but that's part of your job. Like, you created that social media space. Allow your community to come in and educate you educate you on the issues as well.
All right. I like it. Mike Delgado, OI, the original influencer. I'm gonna call you that forever now, Mike. It's a wrap. You now have to just take that. This has been such a really great conversation. Some of the things that I love that you talked about is just getting curious, learning about each other, authenticity. I could definitely feel the heart in like who you are and what you represent. I really appreciate you spending this time with me today. Is there anything you want to share or leave, or anywhere for people to follow? Well, you can is following the Experian handle by default following you? I don't know. Is there anywhere that people should be looking out for you, or next thing you got coming up?
Sure. I'm on Twitter at Mike Delgado, and I also have another Twitter handle at Delgado Podcast. And those are areas where I share the different work that I'm doing in podcasting as well as video streaming.
All right. Sounds good. Well, thank you again. Thank you so much. This has been great.
Thanks, Shelly.
Thanks for joining us, Disruptors, and congratulations. You have taken another step toward being friggin' amazing. Make sure you visit us at adoseofdisruption.com, where you can subscribe to the show in iTunes, Stitcher, Spotify, or via RSS feed. Rate and subscribe if you're all the way live. Rate and subscribe if you're all the way live. That's right. Tell a friend, rate and subscribe to keep us all the way live. Come back next week so we can disrupt some more shit.